Hey, welcome back, everyone. Hey, thanks again for joining us for session 2 of the Copilot Summer Series. So I'm Stephen Lauber, and I'll be your host again for this session today. This is a continuation of our Copilot Summer Series. The series runs every 3 weeks throughout the summer. But before we get going here, please do me a favor. If you guys can hear me okay, would you just drop a quick note in the chat? Great, perfect. Appreciate that. Hey, I know many of you have been watching this series on demand, but for those of you here with me live today, I appreciate that. And if you have any questions today as we go through, please drop those in the chat. I'll make sure we leave some time at the end to go over those. And just a quick intro here for those of you who don't know me or haven't watched session 1, again, I'm Stephen Lauber. I'm the CEO of Trailhead. We are a technology partner. We work with businesses to protect their data and to reduce their technology risk and help them stay in control as new technologies start to show up in their organizations. Here's a QR code that will take you to my contact page. And as we go through the series, if something sparks a question, I'm always opening to continue the conversation. So please reach out and let's go ahead and get going. So our last session was about understanding Copilot, what it is, what it isn't, and why the environment around it matters just as much as the AI itself. And then today we take the next step. Today is about using Copilot with more confidence, not because we've ignored the risks, but because we understand them well enough to move forward responsibly. And I want to say this up front. The session today is not just about guardrails. Yes, we're going to talk about some controls, some ownership and permissions and readiness, but we're also going to start going more hands-on. We're going to start getting into Copilot, seeing what it actually feels like when it's connected to real work. And that's the shift today. See, the last session, we built some understanding. This session gets practical. And the core idea under all of this is that confidence comes from context, not caution. But before we go deeper, I want to quickly reground this in the bigger picture. You see, this series is not a set of disconnected webinars. It's designed to move in an intentional order. Session 1 was about understanding, and session 2 is about beginning to use Copilot responsibly. Session 3 is going to move into everyday workflows, and then session 4 is going to look at some newer capabilities and where the platform is going. And then session 5 is going to focus on expanding use kind of thoughtfully here over time. So today sits right in the middle of an important transition. You see, we're moving from what is this into how do we begin using it without creating avoidable problems? Because one of the biggest mistakes that organizations make with AI is jumping to capability before they've built confidence. And once that happens, adoption gets ahead of understanding. So today is really about making sure that the next step is a strong one. So let me reconnect us to a few core ideas from session 1. First, Copilot works inside your Microsoft 365 boundaries. And second, Copilot Chat is available broadly and gives organizations a safer place to begin experimenting with AI inside those existing boundaries. And third, the licensed Copilot experience becomes materially different because it adds work context. Things like emails and files, meetings and chats, the signals of work. But maybe the most important line from session 1 was this: Copilot reveals existing risk faster than it creates it. So that's the setup for everything we're talking about today. because once AI can summarize or connect and surface information faster, the quality of the environment starts to matter a lot more. If access is messy, that shows up faster. If content is stale, that shows up faster. And if ownership is unclear, that shows up faster. So today is not about introducing fear. It's about helping people understand why practical structure matters before broader use becomes trustworthy. There's a big difference between curiosity and adoption. Experimenting with Copilot is easy. You can ask a few questions, try a few prompts, get a quick feel for what's useful. That stage matters, but it's also relatively low pressure. I mean, the moment you move from experimentation into adoption, that conversation changes. Now you're no longer asking, can this do something useful? Now you're asking, what does it surface? What does it connect? What is it pulling from? And are we comfortable with the environment it's operating in? That's why adoption raises different questions. Not because the tool changed, because the stakes changed. And so what changes as we move to adoption? Well, experimentation is easy. Adoption increases visibility, and confidence depends on the environment. That's really the sentence under this entire slide. When people are just trying Copilot, the outputs can feel interesting, maybe even impressive. But once it becomes part of real work, visibility increases in a very practical way. Now the environment starts to matter. How data is shared, how current the files are, whether teams and SharePoint structure still make sense, and whether old content is still hanging around, whether permissions are broader than anyone intended. That's why confidence doesn't come from enthusiasm. It comes from knowing the environment around Copilot is disciplined enough that the answers it gives are both useful and appropriate. So when we talk about guardrails today, don't hear barriers. Hear this instead. These are the things that let you move forward without hoping for the best. And this is one of the more important slides in the whole session, because most organizations, they already have issues in their environment. Not because someone made a huge mistake, but because work accumulates. Over time, you end up with files that are shared too broadly, sites that no one really owns anymore, outdated folders, duplicate content, maybe inherited permissions, and nobody fully remembers, and that's normal. But before Copilot, a lot of that stayed buried. People had to go looking for it. Copilot changes that because now it can connect and surface information much faster than a person clicking through Outlook or Teams or SharePoint and OneDrive. So the real issue isn't, is Copilot risky? The issue is, what does Copilot now make visible that we had quietly tolerated? That's why I say Copilot doesn't create chaos, it reveals it. The gaps were already there. Copilot just makes them easier to find. And that can be uncomfortable, but it's also useful because it gives organizations, a chance to fix what was already there instead of pretending that the environment was cleaner than it really was. So that leads to the practical question: if Copilot makes the environment more visible, what should you actually do about it? The answer is not to panic. The answer is to start getting your house in order. And I'm saying that intentionally because this is more operational than technical. Before you worry about advanced agents or flashy workflows or new capabilities, start by asking whether the environment underneath them is in reasonable shape. And this is where ownership and cleanup, access review, and practical governance start to matter. Not because you need perfection, but because you do need enough structure that Copilot isn't amplifying confusion. So this next section is really about preparation. It's simpler than most people expect. One of the simplest guardrails and one that's the most overlooked is ownership. Every meaningful site, a team or a workspace or major content area should have someone responsible for it. Not because that person has to make everything perfect, but because someone needs to know why it exists, who should have access, whether it's still current, and whether the content inside it still belongs there. You see, if no one owns it, the environment still functions, but it drifts. And once Copilot is involved, drift gets exposed. And that's why I also like the phrase that someone has to own the mess. Because whether the environment is clean or not, Copilot's going to use it either way. And ownership reduces ambiguity. It gives your organization, someone who can answer, no, this should be retired, or yes, these permissions still make sense, or no, this area over here needs review. And this is not an admin detail. This is a real guardrail. So if you're looking for one practical place to start here, your SharePoint and your team sites. Run each one through a few simple questions. Is this still needed? Is there a clear owner? Are the permissions still appropriate? And is the content still current? And who's actually using it? I mean, I know this sounds basic, but it's powerful because Copilot doesn't ask those questions. It doesn't ask, is this stale? Did this team dissolve 2 years ago? Was this inherited from an old project? Is anyone even using this? It just works with what's there. So if what's there is outdated or overshared or ownerless, that becomes part of the quality problem and part of the exposure problem. You don't need 12 months of AI strategy to begin improving your environment. You need a practical checklist and a little discipline. And this is one of the easiest places to begin. And I want to name one specific concept here because it gives organizations a useful way to think about rollout, and that's restricted SharePoint search. And the point here is not that everyone in the room needs to go configure it tomorrow. The point is this: you don't have to expose everything on day one. You don't need to think in extremes like, everything's available or nothing is available. Some content areas may be reviewed and ready, but some may not. Some spaces might be clean enough to include in broader Copilot reasoning, and others may still not. They might need some permission cleanup, some ownership clarification, or content review. So the real takeaway is staged visibility. Rollout doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can move in intentionally, and you can reduce the surface area at first. You can let readiness shape exposure. I mean, that's not fear, that's control. And once you start thinking that way, the conversation changes. It stops being, should we trust AI? And it becomes, hey, what are we ready to trust it with? All right, let's move into the core guardrails. And again, I want to keep this practical because words like sensitivity labels and data loss prevention, or DLP, retention, governance, purview, they can very quickly sound like, that's an IT thing. But these aren't just technical terms. They're simply different ways of answering one question. What is our organization comfortable with? So for the next few slides, I'm not trying to teach technical setup. I'm trying to explain what each of these actually does in plain language. Because once people understand that, it becomes much easier to decide where to start. And at a practical level, these guardrails do three things. First, they help classify and protect data. Second, They help prevent sensitive information from being used in ways you're not comfortable with. And third, they help keep the environment current enough that Copilot isn't constantly reasoning over clutter and noise and outdated content. That's really the model. Classify and protect, reduce unsafe exposure, and keep the environment current and governed. So now let's take those one at a time. All right, this is where sensitivity labels come in. At the simplest level, sensitivity labels tell the system how sensitive the data is. That might mean internal or confidential, maybe highly sensitive, or whatever categories that your organization uses. And the important point is that that label's not just visual. It can influence how content is protected and who can use it, where it can go, and what restrictions stay attached to it. So this isn't just classification for compliance paperwork. It becomes part of how the environment makes decisions about the content. And for Copilot, that really matters because Copilot doesn't operate outside those protections. It works within them. So when I say labels tell the system how sensitive data is, what I really mean is this. They help the environment make better decisions before a user enters, either ever types a prompt. And that's why labels are such an important guardrail. All right, let's now talk about DLP, or data loss prevention. DLP answers a different question, not how sensitive is this content, but what should never be used or exposed in certain ways. And that's an important distinction because data loss prevention is really about limits. It helps detect sensitive information in prompts or content, and it helps block risky use cases before they create problems. So in practical terms, if a prompt includes certain kinds of sensitive information, or if content falls into a category that organization doesn't want used in certain ways, DLP, or data loss prevention, can step in. And that matters because one of the easiest mistakes people make with AI is assuming that if I can type it, I probably should. And that's not always true. And DLP helps put boundaries around that, not by shutting everything down, but by reducing accidental leakage and unsafe use of sensitive information. And this is less about restriction for restriction's sake and more about preventing the mistakes nobody intended to make. So this is the guardrail people overlook the most. Good AI depends on good data, or said another way, most organizations, they don't have a Copilot problem. They have an old content problem. The outdated files still influence results. Old presentations still sit next to current ones. Past project folders still exist, or duplicate content piles up. Copilot has no magical instinct that says this file is old, but that file is current. It works with what's available. That's why lifecycle and retention matter so much. Retention reduces noise, and lifecycle improves relevance. And governance keeps the rules consistent. And the less clutter in the environment, the less likely Copilot is to surface stale answers. That's what I mean when I say better data means better AI. Not because the model changed, but because what the model can see is healthier. So if an organization wants better Copilot results, one of the smartest things it can do is not just prompt better, it's clean up enough of the environment that better prompting has something better to work with. Okay, so let's now shift from concepts into experience, because at some point this has to become visible. Up to now, we've been talking about readiness and ownership, data quality, permissions, and guardrails. But what people really need to feel is this: what difference does all of that make in practice? And the clearest way is to show that is in the demo. So that the next few minutes are about making the difference visible, not in theory, in experience. Here's what I want you to watch for. Not just whether Copilot gives an answer, but whether it understands the work. See, at a glance, these experiences, they can look similar. And that's part of why people get confused with Copilot. The same interface, but very different outcomes. Copilot Chat is a safe web-based starting point, but licensed Copilot is tied to your work, and they both still sit inside the same broader security and governance posture that we've been talking about the last couple of sessions. So the point is not one is safe and one is dangerous. The point is one is more general and one is more connected. And that connection changes the quality of the answer. Because once licensed Copilot can reason over the work a user already has permission to access, the outputs become more specific and more contextual, more operationally useful. So I want you to notice in the demo is not just, hey, the answer is longer. I want you to notice that the answer understands the work. And this is the moment where licensed Copilot starts to feel different. Because now, instead of manually uploading a file or feeding a content into the prompt one piece at a time, Copilot can reason across the user's real work context. That includes things like emails and documents, maybe meeting summaries and Teams conversations, and related files already available to that user. And that shift matters because this is where Copilot stops behaving like a smart chat box. And it starts acting like context-aware assistance. All right, so let me show you that difference. I'm going to do this in two parts. First, I'll ask a simple project question in Copilot Chat, and then I'll ask that same question in the licensed version of Copilot in that experience. And I want you to watch for one thing. That's what changes when the context changes. Okay, so again, to set the stage here, I am signed in as our demo user that you saw in session 1, and I'm going to start with the web context. And if you remember this slider, this is kind of the key that we were talking about. We're going to focus on this again today. When I am not licensed for a Copilot specific license, when I'm using just my Microsoft 365 license, I don't have access to work. I'm signed in as a user who does have a Microsoft 365 or Copilot license, excuse me. They have a Copilot license. So I have this toggle, but if you don't have that Copilot license, you won't have that toggle. You'll only have the web access. So I'm going to start with this. What we're going to do is I'm going to put a prompt in here, and have these pre-typed. So let me copy and paste these here so you guys, again, don't have to see me type my struggling. Okay, so I'm gonna ask Copilot. And again, remember, I'm just asking the web context. So this is the non-licensed version of Copilot. I'm going to ask Copilot, summarize the current status of the Harborview HQ refresh project. So I'll go ahead and send that off, and let's see what we get back here. Okay, there we go. All right, so notice the first response, and this is kind of what we would expect. So Copilot tells me, hey, I don't have access to your organization's internal project data, so I can't see real-time details for that project. However, here's a clear executive style summary you can use or adapt. So I mean, not that this is interesting. It's good, helpful information. It's things that I could maybe take and help me frame some project status updates, but it's general. It's not specific to my data, my project that I would like it to work with, because I don't have the licensed version of Copilot right now. Okay, and I would actually have to add those manually by uploading files. Still have all the same protections, but this is like public chat. So now I'm going to give it. We're going to switch over to the work context. So now it can reason over my work, and I'm going to give it basically the same prompt. Let me grab that again. I want you to notice what changes here. Okay, so summarize the current status of the Harborview HQ refresh project based on my recent activity. And now you'll start to notice that it's actually starting to kind of work on some other things. It's looking through different contexts. It's actually able to see files that I have access to, that this user has access to. I've had some Teams chats with Mark about this project, so it's accessing those. We've had some email conversations, so all of that data, as well as some meeting summaries that we had made. Again, this is demo information that we put together, but giving you an idea of how this can work. It's now giving me a very rich response that's based on various sources. I can see it's pulled up some of these documents and some email conversations, some Teams chats, and gives me a really robust summary of that status. And notice I didn't upload anything. It had access to the content, was able to search the relevant data within my Microsoft 365 environment and surface that for me. We'll do a couple more prompts here. I'm going to grab this one just to kind of help you illustrate some more at this point. So I'm going to ask Copilot, hey, where do team members appear to disagree about the Harborview schedule risk? And again, it's now able to go through all of the relevant information we talked about and give me some really rich, really kind of profound responses. Okay? Much more so than just generic AI chats, right? And we'll do, I'm just going to do a couple more. I'm curious here to kind of see, we're going to let that finish it. It's still reasoning through. I'm going to give it another prompt. I'm going to ask what actions are currently assigned and who owns them. And help me kind of break out the action items in this project. Give me a summary of who's been assigned what's happening there. Again, it's able to go through. I had some project summary meetings and some of the conversations that dealt with these type of action items and some of the deadlines. All right. See the different tasks, who they've been assigned to. And just showing you that power of what Copilot, when it's reasoning through our work context, how that really changes. And then the last one that I want to show is as I'm getting ready for a leadership conversation here, I want to prepare for this. So I'm going to ask Copilot, prepare me for a leadership conversation about Harborview, include the risks, likely questions, and options. So let's see what it does with that. And these, I realize these are some pretty standard kind of basic prompts that we're giving Copilot. We're going to dig in the upcoming sessions, dig in a lot more. We're going to get into more robust type of reasoning and prompting and back and forth capabilities that you'll see with Copilot. But this is really just meant to show you the power of Copilot being able to reason across my work context. But here it's giving me a leadership ready prep brief. Great starting points. Again, these, as I said, these were pretty basic prompts. I've not given it a whole lot of instruction, but you can see it's already able to reason through an awful lot of information by itself and make some of those decisions without me having to upload individual files. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so same question, same user, but no manual upload, but completely different answers. So what changed? And it was the context, right? I mean, the whole point of licensed Copilot, it's nothing magical's happened here. It's no new permissions were created, no hidden data source suddenly appeared. The difference is simply that Copilot could reason over a work context that user already had permission to access. And once people understand that, the value becomes much easier to explain because now they're no longer thinking, oh, it's just more AI. Now they're thinking, oh, it's AI connected to work. And that's a fundamentally different thing. And that's also why the environment matters so much, because once AI becomes connected to work, what it can see and what it should see matter more. The licensed experience also opens up more over time, right? And that includes things like deeper integration across apps, more advanced capabilities, and access to new Copilot experiences that are happening all the time, agents and more task-specific workflows. So even without diving into those today, it's worth acknowledging where this is heading. As capabilities expand, the importance of the foundation only increases because the more connected and capable that Copilot becomes, the more valuable and more sensitive the environment around it becomes too. That's why I'm comfortable mentioning things like these newer agents and model flexibility and platform evolution, not to feature chase, but to reinforce one practical idea. If the foundation matters now, it's going to matter even more later. So this slide is really a bridge. We're not diving into those capabilities today, but we are making it clear that the work you do on readiness now is what allows those future capabilities to be useful later. So if there's one takeaway from today, I want it to be this. This is a readiness decision. Copilot reveals real risk, and guardrails build confidence. And the right move is not to wait until everything is perfect. It's to start and then expand. That framing matters because it gets us away from the false choices people fall into. All in or not at all. Fully ready or completely blocked. Trust it immediately or fear it completely. The better answer is understand what it surfaces. Put the right guardrails around it, start intentionally, and then expand. And one practical reminder before we wrap here. We'll continue building out the series resource page on our landing page for a place for you to go to for recordings and recap points, Microsoft links, and practical checklists that support the ideas. Because nobody should feel like when you leave this session that you feel like you need to memorize everything, right? If just a quick note on how to keep this conversation going. First, make sure you register for session 3, right? Everyday workflows in Copilot. That's coming up on July 16th. That's where we're going to move from readiness into more practical day-to-day use. And as I said, we're going to get our sleeves rolled up a little bit more. We'll spend a lot more time in Copilot than on the slide deck like we've done in the first couple sessions. And then second, if you want to revisit that foundation, you can watch the session 1 recording. You can also look for the follow-up emails for those that have registered for the events with some resources. And then finally, for registration and those additional materials, go to trailhead365.com/Copilot Summer. That's going to be your easiest place to access those next steps and stay connected to the rest of the series. So thanks again. I appreciate you guys spending some time today. Appreciate that. I know it's valuable. And if anything that we talked about today maybe raised any questions for your environment, or if you're trying to figure out where to start, don't hesitate to reach out. My contact information is here on the screen. I'm always happy to have a conversation. No pressure, just helping you think it through. Otherwise, hope to see you in session 3. And thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.